Let's talk about Congress. You know, that group of people in Washington who are supposed to represent you. But how exactly are they supposed to do that? Today, we're going to dive into the theories of how it should work, and then stack that up against the messy reality of how it actually does.
So let's just get right to the heart of it, shall we? Think about the person who represents your district in Congress. What is their number one job? Should they vote exactly the way the majority of folks back home want them to? Or should you trust them to use their own expertise and judgment to make the call? It's not as simple as it sounds.
Okay, so this whole debate really boils down to two classic models. On one hand, you've got the delegate. Think of them as a mouthpiece. Their job is to channel the preferences of their constituents, period. If the district wants something, they vote for it. Then you've got the trustee. A trustee will listen to you for sure, but ultimately they believe you elected them to use their own judgment on complicated issues. You're trusting them to do what's best.
But, real life is rarely that clean, right? That's where a third model comes in, the Politico. And honestly, this is probably the closest to what we actually see. It's a hybrid. On the huge, hot-button issues that everyone's talking about, they act as a delegate. But for all that other, more technical stuff that flies under the radar, they switch gears and become a trustee.
So we've got these three ideas: delegate, trustee, Politico. But hold on, before we can even argue about which one is better, we have to talk about something way more fundamental: fairness. I mean, the entire system kind of hinges on the idea that every person's vote should count the same. But does it?
To see how this can get weird, let's use a super simple example. Imagine a class of just 10 people. They're trying to decide where to go for dinner, steak or seafood. But here's the twist. Instead of just voting all together, they're broken up into 3 little voting districts.
Now, if you just count up the individual votes, it's a blowout. 6 people want steak, 4 want seafood. Steak wins. The majority has spoken. Simple, right?
But watch what happens when we decide this thing by district. 2 of the districts vote for seafood, and only 1 votes for steak. All of a sudden, seafood wins, even though 60% of the actual people wanted steak. How in the world does that happen?
This isn't just a silly game about dinner. This is a real thing called malapportionment. It's when districts have wildly different populations, which means a vote in a smaller district is way more powerful than a vote in a huge one. And this is exactly what was going on in the state of Tennessee for 60 years.
So here's what happened. Tennessee drew its district maps way back in 1901 and then just didn't touch them for decades. As people moved into cities, those urban districts got enormous while the rural ones stayed tiny. But they all had the same number of representatives. This huge imbalance finally boiled over and landed in front of the Supreme Court in 1962 in a landmark case called Baker versus Carr. And what came out of Baker v. Carr was a total game changer. It established a core principle of American democracy: one person, one vote. The court said, look, under the 14th Amendment, you can't have districts with wildly different populations. They have to be roughly equal. Basically, your vote shouldn't be worth more or less just because of your zip code.
So problem solved, right? The Supreme Court fixed it. Well, not exactly. See, even if every district has the same number of people, the way you draw the lines of those districts can still be totally rigged. What happens when drawing the map itself becomes a political weapon?
And that brings us to a word I'm sure you've heard tossed around a lot: gerrymandering. It's basically the dark art of drawing those district lines with one specific goal: to give your party an unfair advantage at the ballot box. And if you think this is some new, modern problem, think again. The word gerrymander was actually coined all the way back in 1812. Just a year later, a newspaper called a newly drawn district a terrific dragon that was going to devour your liberties. I mean, come on, this fight over the map is literally as old as the country itself.
So how do they do it today? Well, it's gotten way more sophisticated with computers and data. One popular tactic is called cracking. You take a big city, like Austin, and slice it up into a bunch of different districts that are mostly suburban or rural. That waters down the city's vote. The opposite is packing. That's where you cram all of your opponent's voters into one super concentrated district. They'll win that district in a landslide, sure, but it makes it way easier for your party to win all the districts around it. And sometimes you end up with these absolutely bizarre-looking districts, like the famous earmuff district they had in Chicago.
Okay, so the shape of a district is clearly a huge deal, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. How a representative acts is also shaped by the bigger political climate they're operating in. And a huge feature of that climate, especially these days, is something called divided government. You've seen this before. It's when, say, a Republican is in the White House but Democrats control the House of Representatives.
One party has the presidency, the other has at least part of Congress.
Now, when you hear divided government, your mind probably goes straight to one word: gridlock. Nothing gets done, everybody just fights, right? And yeah, that definitely happens, a lot. But there's another school of thought. Some people argue that divided government can actually be a good thing because it forces the two sides to come to the table and hammer out big, bipartisan deals.
In fact, you don't have to take my word for it. Longtime Senate leader Mitch McConnell has actually made this exact point. He says divided government is the perfect time to do big things. The logic is, if both parties have to sign off on a bill, they both share the political risk and the credit. And that can make it easier to tackle really tough issues that one party might be too scared to touch on its own.
And there's some history to back this up. Think about the major Social Security fix under President Reagan in a Democratic House, or the huge tax reform that also happened under Reagan, or even welfare reform signed by President Clinton with a Republican Congress. These were all massive deals that got done under divided government.
All right, so let's bring it all back home. We started with these three models for how a representative should act: the delegate, who just follows orders from back home, the trustee, who uses their own best judgment, and the politico, who kind of plays both roles depending on the situation. And that leaves us with one final, really tough question. In the system we have now, with gerrymandered districts that can make seats super safe for one party, and with a national government that's often divided and gridlocked, which of these models actually works best? Do you want a delegate who fights like crazy for their district, no matter what? A trustee who's trying to build bridges and find compromise? Or a smart politico who knows when to fight and when to deal? There really is no easy answer.